All right, I think it's time. So, welcome back, distinguished guests. We are now proceeding to the panel discussion session, which will explore the theme, the Bangkok Rules in Context, Building Gender-Responsive Justice for a Sustainable and Peaceful World. Today's panelist brings diverse and distinguished expertise. The first one, Dr. Mahtani Justin, former director of the European Institute for Crime Prevention and Control, affiliated with the United Nations or HEUNI, and advisor to the Thailand Institute of Justice as well. Please welcome Dr. Mahtani. Next, Ms. Taghreed, Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa, Penal Reform International or PRI. The third one, Ms. Sabrina Mahtani, founder of Women Beyond Walls. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Nattha Komolvadhin, News Director of The Standard. May I kindly invite all the moderators and esteemed panelists to take the seats on the stage. Dr. Nattha, the stage is yours.
สวัสดีค่ะ Good afternoon. So I'm very honored. Let me introduce myself. I'm Nattha Komolvadhin from The Standard and very honored to be moderating this very important session. And because this is part of international forum marking the 15 years of the Bangkok Rules, so it's the opportunity to reflect from what we heard from the morning inside, and it's time for us to really focus on what truly matters in terms of really promoting the Bangkok Rules to make it like more real, sustained, and gender responsive across nation, society, and across the world. So today's title, our session is the Bangkok Rules in Context, Building Gender Responsive Justice for a Sustainable and Peaceful World. But the Bangkok Rules at this very juncture, as you all know, that we are in the complex global context at the moment because the world is marked by inequality, by so many troubles, conflicts, and economic pressure, and also rising incarceration rates among women. So this panel will help us try to understand why this urgent issue matters and how we can address to the Bangkok Rules. So today we have distinguished panelists, and let me introduce them one by one so you can know their work and their mission and how they involve with the Bangkok Rules. I learned from the three of you that you have been involved with the Bangkok Rules from the very beginning, and you know the path of the Bangkok Rules, how it's been applied through the UN, through your work, and the implication for the whole society. For the first one, we have Dr. Mahtani Justin. He was former director of HEUNI and advisor at GIJ for over 5 decades. Dr. Justin has shaped the UN Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice Program, contributing to global standards, UN crime conventions, and chairing UN crime congresses. Second, we have Ms. Sabrina Mahtani. She is Zambian British human rights lawyer and founder of Women Beyond Walls, with 20 years of experience on access to justice for women, and she has worked with Amnesty International, the Elders, PRI, UNODC, and co-founded Advocate in Sierra Leone. And we also have Ms. Taghreed. She's Regional Director for Penal Reform International in the Middle East and North Africa, with 25 years of experience in human rights and criminal justice reform across 16 countries. She played a direct role in drafting the Bangkok Rules and revising the Mandela Rules. So let me begin with Dr. Mahtani to learn about the Bangkok Rules in the context of crime prevention and criminal justice. Each of you will have time for about 20 minutes to give presentation to address your point. And the question to you, Dr. Justin, The Bangkok Rules are part of a broader body of UN standards and norms on crime prevention and criminal justice. From your perspective, what makes the Bangkok Rules distinctive with this global framework?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nattha, for that introduction. If I could make one slight correction, you had mentioned 50 years of experience in the UN and with the TIJ. Perhaps my experience with the TIJ is a little bit shorter than that. But okay, we have 50 years of experience, 30 years of experience, 25 years of experience. That's close to a century among the three of us. So I don't know if I should be feeling old. Anyway, Sawadee Krap, and it is a pleasure to be here, Your Excellency and distinguished audience, and also good friends here at the TIJ. What I want to do is give you the UN context for the Bangkok Rules. Some mention has already been made by His Excellency the Prime Minister and by Dr. Kittipong that it has already been 15 years. But 15 years is actually a very short time. And I would like to simply put the Bangkok Rules into context by, yes, here we go. I'll give you 3 points, and I'll try to keep them very simple and straightforward. The first point will be basically the Bangkok Rules, how do they fit in with the UN standards and norms? The second point is how the Bangkok Rules have evolved. Is there anything exceptional about them? And the third point is the role of the Thailand Institute of Justice in bringing the Bangkok Rules forward. And in all of these respects, I think the Bangkok Rules are an exception, and a glowing exception, in that it is affecting not just standards for the treatment of women prisoners and those women who have non-custodial punishment imposed on them, but more generally in how criminal justice and crime prevention is understood around the world. So to get to my first point, and that is how the Bangkok Rules fit in with United Nations standards and norms. The United Nations standards and norms is a body of soft law that have been developed over the past 70 years. Among them, the Bangkok Rules is a very new in development. But the Bangkok Rules have shifted the discussion in at least 3 respects. It as a gender issue, as an institutional issue in the work of the United Nations and through the United Nations Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice Program, to refer to it shortly as the United Nations Crime Program. It has then had an impact elsewhere. And third, the Bangkok Rules, even though they are fairly recent, from 2010, it has stimulated work in other areas. Now, to get to my first point, and that is the Bangkok Rules as a gender issue. Now, I have followed the United Nations Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice Program for quite a while. And for a very long period, since the United Nations Crime Program was begun back in 1948, 1949, it was a male chauvinist reserve. It was male-dominated, which is totally understandable when you think about how criminal justice was perceived, how crime was perceived at that time. The assumption was that criminals are male. Not only that, but the practitioners working in the criminal justice system were male, and they had a male perspective, a male understanding of what causes crime and how we should correct that behavior. And this male dominance of the discussion was reflected also within the work of the United Nations Crime Program, the discussions bringing the different nations together, they're almost always male experts, to discuss, well, what should we do? And a wonderful example of this was the second United Nations Congress, which was held in London back in 1960, where in addition to the program, you had a special program of interest for the wives of participants, which, if I recall, included a visit to Harrods, a visit to have tea somewhere, and then to a perfume shop. I don't know if any men accompanied them, but I would have been interested. But beginning in the 1970s, the gender issue gradually began to come into the criminal justice discussion, into the crime prevention discussion. And it did become reflected also in how the United Nations worked. This was first seen, for example, in discussions on violence against women, generally on victimization by women, so as victims. But then it did expand to other issues. And already in 1980, there was actually, this is perhaps a footnote in history, there was a short 4-paragraph resolution on the specific needs of women prisoners, which called upon the United Nations to continue that discussion and bring it up at the next UN Congress. It didn't go anywhere. The United Nations discussion on the gender then also was reflected in discussions on non-custodial and the restorative approach, which were coming into the United Nations program. And this brings in the institutional aspect of where the Bangkok rules fit in the UN crime program. Back in 1990, 35 years ago, the United Nations crime program went through a restructuring process. And following that, there was a considerable amount of resistance by many of the member states, or sorry, at least some of the member states who were sending representatives to Vienna to discuss the UN crime program as to what that program should be doing. And when the discussion of UN standards and norms came up, those few representatives said, we already have enough soft law. What we want is something that really makes an impact in practice. The focus should be on priority issues, which at that time was this understood to be transnational organized crime, which again was something that people visualized as a male preserve. And there was also a downgrading in the involvement of non-governmental organizations in the work of the United Nations crime program. This third aspect of how the United Nations Bangkok rules changed the evolution of the standards and norms has to do with what happened after the Bangkok rules were adopted. They were adopted in 2010 following discussion about, well, how should we treat women prisoners, women who are subjected to non-custodial punishment? And then people began to realize, wait, this also has an impact on other rules. And so the very same year as the Bangkok rules were adopted, the General Assembly called for a review of the standard minimum rules for the treatment of all prisoners, which led in time to the so-called Mandela Rule revision adopted in 2015. My second overall point is the Bangkok rules emerged very quickly, relatively quickly. When I look at how standards and norms have generally been adopted over the time that I have followed the United Nations, there is now a fairly set process. First, some individual, or today almost always an individual member state, will go to the United Nations Drug Crime Control Program and say, we need a new standard and norm on A or on B or on C. This will be discussed at the United Nations Commission. Then maybe they will say, okay, why don't you go ahead and do a draft and we'll take a look at it, without any commitments on that. Then there will be a preparation of that draft. You will have expert group meetings on, well, what should go into this draft? And now the pressure by some member states is to have those draft preparations, that expert group meeting, as an intergovernmental expert meeting, which has its own connotations, and that is that it is the member states that should send representatives, not the non-governmental organizations. It is the member states who control criminal justice, at least according to those who want these intergovernmental working groups. And should it be open-ended? That means, could any member state that wants to participate? Well, that would broaden the scope, of course, bring in more people, but make the expert meeting discussions less manageable when you have more people calling for their own priorities. Then after you have gone through these expert group meeting processes, you would go to the discussion at the next session of the UN Crime Commission, held every year. And if it is adopted there, it will then go to the Economic and Social Council and to the General Assembly. This can be a long process. Some cases has taken 5 to 10 years. In the case of the original Standard Amendment rules for the treatment of prisoners, it took 40 years. Why are the Bangkok rules exceptional? Simply because, as was very movingly told us by Dr. Kittipong Kitayarak, it was the role of Her Royal Highness, Princess Bairakitiyabha, who in 2008 launched the Enhancing Lives of Female Inmates project. That led to an open-ended intergovernmental expert meeting held in Bangkok, which drafted those rules. And I have to say that Her Royal Highness was very much involved in ensuring that this process is done in an expeditious way. In 2010, they were presented to the United Nations Crime Congress. These are held every 5 years. And the Crime Congress looked at them and said, oh, yes, this looks very good. From the Crime Congress, which they went almost immediately to the same year session of the UN Crime Commission. And I was present at that meeting. And I have been to all of the UN Crime Commission meetings and many of the UN Crime Committee meetings before that. And I could say that what happened there was singular, in that Her Royal Highness was present as the ambassador of Thailand to the intergovernmental organizations in Vienna. She was the chairperson of that session. I have seen very many able ambassadors guide the discussions. I have rarely seen a person who had the professional expertise to understand the background of the issue and explain to some, perhaps recalcitrant, some resisting people why certain aspects of the draft Bangkok rules were important. She was very persuasive, and certainly also because of the very good work of the Thai national delegation to the Commission, they went very smoothly through the Crime Commission and were adopted later that year. Now, my third and last point has to do with the exceptional role of the Thailand Institute of Justice. As has already been mentioned this afternoon before the break, if standards and norms are not implemented, there is very little value to them. The time is now, the work must proceed on them. The difficulty here was that how that work proceeds has been made more difficult within the UN crime program, because back in 2006, 2007, a few years before the Bangkok rules were adopted, there were a few member states saying, or a few representatives of member states saying, we don't need to follow the implementation of UN standards and norms. Much effort had been made before that by the UNODC to send out questionnaires, to compile voluntary reports from different countries, and get information real-time information from around the world as to how things were proceeding with the Standard Amendment rules on the treatment of prisoners, with the victim declaration, with the other 40-some, well, actually it's more than 40, now close to 50 standards and norms. But in 2006, 2007, those efforts were halted. They were halted on various grounds. I don't want to get into the details of this. But the result of this was that how the standards and norms are implemented, whether the Bangkok rules or any other standards and norms, is now left to individual member states if they are willing to do so. Some have been very willing, others less so. The UNODC and the Program Network of Institutes, together with various non-governmental organizations, have tried to promote implementation and have worked with member states that have requested that assistance. There are 3 program network institutes that do have a sectoral responsibility. The Basel Institute deals with corruption and money laundering. The Institute in Montreal deals with crime prevention. The Raoul Wallenberg Institute deals basically with human rights issues. But the Bangkok rules is clearly linked to the Thailand Institute of Justice. So the Thailand Institute of Justice was established basically to take those rules forward. It was mentioned earlier that it is the UNODC that is the custodian of the Bangkok rules. That is correct. But I would say that in practice, it is the Thailand Institute of Justice. There has been an immense amount of research, publications, and technical assistance coming out of the Thailand Institute of Justice, which is disseminated, made available, a passive process, even though you have a lot of active work in the TIJ, but it is out there if people want to do it. But in addition to that, the TIJ has been doing outreach to talk with practitioners, experts, organizations in countries, certainly within Southeast Asia, but also more globally, to get them to look at these. I was very much happy to learn of the next part of our program after our panel presentation, and that is when we will have the launch of the Bangkok Rules Accelerator for Global Stocktaking, because that is, in my mind, something that, again, Thailand and the Thailand Institute of Justice, working together with UNODC, is doing that can have an impact more broadly on standards and norms. Because in the future, this may lead to a voluntary reporting procedure that could be a model also for other standards and norms, bring implementation of the standards and norms back into a more organized process. And if the UN Crime Commission so decides, and nothing is stopping the UN Crime Commission from doing that, there could be a special working group or a special rapporteur. And I'm sure if that special working group or special rapporteur is established, then a Thailand Institute of Justice will have a role in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Matti Yusen, about your journey and to tell us about the evolution of the Bangkok rules within the framework of UNODC and how it has been implied, how it has been introduced as the standards, global and norms that many countries can also adopt to be using. And also, obviously, it's the contribution, great contribution of Her Royal Highness that bring the mission of the Bangkok rules forward and also raise awareness in Thailand. And thank you for mentioning that it's the gender issue. The Bangkok rules is gender and institutional issue. Thank you very much. Okay, let me move on to our next panelist, Ms. Sabrina Mahtani, on the theme of poverty to punishment and community-based justice for women offenders. Your recent work on From Poverty to Punishment highlights the deep intersection between poverty and women criminalization. So how does poverty shape women's experience and pathway into the criminal justice reform? Please.
Thank you so much. Distinguished guests, it's an honor to be here, and I want to give my thanks to the government of Thailand and TIJ for their leadership on the promotion of the Bangkok rules and implementation, and just for the honor of being here to celebrate this key moment. 20 years ago, when I started working as a human rights lawyer, working with women in prison, we didn't have the Bangkok rules. There were no international standards to govern the treatment of women in prison. And I remember clearly on that day when the Bangkok rules were launched, and not only did this become an essential tool for myself, civil society groups and lawyers, but I remember printing out posters of the Bangkok rules and hanging them up in a prison in Sierra Leone where I was working at the time. And those women felt so encouraged that they were not forgotten, and actually there were international bodies that were thinking about them. And so I just want to say that the Bangkok rules have been so instrumental, even though we know there is a long way to go, but they mean a huge amount to those of us trying to reform systems, but to the women themselves. As our panelists have mentioned, the Bangkok rules are even more important today because of the rising number of women in prison, and this is really an alarming issue. There are over 750,000 women who are estimated to be in prison worldwide, and I have to stress that this is just what we know. I think what concerns me most, having worked in this area for a long time, is actually we don't really know the number of women who are in prison. And of course, this is not the number of women who might be arrested or criminalized. This is just the number of women who are in prison. And the global female prison population is estimated to have increased by about 59% from 2000 to 2020. And this is growing at a much faster rate than that of men, which has grown by about 22%. Research shows us that prison is not a safe space for women or their children, and there are many intergenerational harms on children from the imprisonment of mothers. I have seen this myself in my work, from seeing children in prison with mothers, seeing women who've miscarried from being shackled while in prison, to even trying to go and find what happened to children when their mothers are in prison and see how they're left in poverty, how they have mental health issues, how they're often subject to more abuse. So when we imprison a mother, we imprison a family. That's something a woman once told me who was in prison. And we should be concerned about stopping not only the number of women in prison, but about these intergenerational harms that prison cause. There are about 19,000 children detained in prison with a parent, mostly their mothers, and 1.4 million children have a mother in prison. Those are really alarming statistics, especially when we think that these are not actually, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Poverty, vulnerability, and gender discrimination are the key reasons behind the increasing number of women in prison. And we know that poverty is not gender neutral and that women are overrepresented amongst the poor. So this results in the criminalization of poverty having a disproportionate impact on women. However, stigma and stereotypes often dominate narratives about women in prison, that they are bad girls and they're deserving of punishment. I just want to play you a very short clip from a podcast that Women Beyond Walls does. And the reason we do this is because we want to amplify the voices of women who've encountered imprisonment themselves from around the world and try to change some of these stereotypes. Oops, let me see if this is going to work. It may not work, but I think this is going to encourage all of you to perhaps listen to the podcast. This is Teresa Njoroge. She is a woman from Kenya, and she was wrongly imprisoned in Kenya for bank fraud. And what she says is that even herself, before she went to prison, she had this idea that women in prison were bad or had done wrong things. But when she got to prison, she found that most of the women she was detained with were simply detained there for poverty, women who were just trying to survive and make a life for themselves. And I think this is really important because I think if we want to reimagine justice for women, if we want to think about how to implement the Bangkok rules, we have to challenge some of those stereotypes that we have ourselves. I often say the reason I have not been in prison myself is not because I'm good or moral, but I had so many privileges of being born in a family who could send me to school. I went to university. I got a good job as a lawyer. And I've never had to make some of those very difficult decisions that women who live in poverty have had to make. Oh, don't worry. Thank you. It's okay. It will encourage all of you to please go listen to the podcast. So I just want to briefly kind of summarize some of the research that Penal Reform and Women Beyond Walls did in this report that we launched at the Commission on the Status of Women this year, supported by TIJ. And the report is called From Poverty to Punishment. And this is one of the first reports that really tried to examine some of the laws and practices across the world that result in women being criminalized due to poverty and vulnerability. I'll really encourage you to visit our website because we have an interactive report there, so it's very easy to kind of go through some of the findings. But this infographic, I think, is also a good start at summarizing some of them. Many reports that we've had on women's imprisonment focuses on the conditions of detention, but here we really wanted to look at these pathways with the hope of reducing women coming into contact with the justice system in the first place. And the report really shows that this is a global issue. So a few of the kind of examples I'll highlight are just examples, but really from global north to global south countries, we do see this. But the report also highlights promising practices, and I think that's important to bear in mind, especially when we think about how we can implement the Bangkok rules. So I'm just going to summarize a few of the key findings. One, as I've mentioned, is that we really have a lack of data, particularly in certain areas such as the Caribbean and the MENA regions. And so I think this is definitely something for hopefully more investment to try and kind of target. The second key finding is that across the world, there are laws and policies that are criminalizing women for life-sustaining activities and acts of survival. Most countries criminalize petty theft, for example. So in England and Wales, shoplifting accounted for 40% of women's prison sentences. This is just in comparison to 22% of men. And when you asked women why they shoplifted, it was often because they were living in situations of poverty. They were stealing nappies or food to feed their babies. We also see many countries criminalize begging. And again, this disproportionately marginalized women or women from ethnic minorities. As a promising practice, in 2018, the High Court in India did decriminalize begging. So we are seeing some moves kind of to reform. Women also make up a disproportionate number of people working in the informal sector, especially in low or middle income countries. This might mean that they are working as domestic workers or street vendors. But this means that women are often left without the protection of labor laws. For example, research in Kenya showed that women are often overrepresented in arrests for brewing illegal alcohol without a license. But many women say, well, they did this because they could access credit informally, and they could actually do this at home so they could look after their children. We also see in some countries many women criminalized for debt or non-payment of fines. Research has shown this in Uganda, in Egypt, in Ireland. So across the world, again, women are really being criminalized due to poverty. In many countries, we still have colonial laws such as vagrancy, loitering, and idleness. And this can often target women who experience homelessness, women who are engaged in sex work or in informal economies. I was involved in a case in Sierra Leone where we actually brought a case at the Regional Human Rights Court challenging the loitering laws. And these laws are very vague and arbitrary, and many women, if you're just walking on the street late at night, you can be arrested by the police. Just because they think if you're a woman of well repute, you wouldn't be walking around in the street. As has also been highlighted by some of the speakers already, harsh drug laws are also driving the increase in women's imprisonment, particularly in regions such as Asia and in Latin America. And the number of women in prison sentenced for drug-related offenses is higher than that of men, comprising 35% of the global women's prison population compared to 19% of men. And this can rise from 50 to 80% in various Latin American and Asian countries. But many women who enter the drug trade often find themselves there because they're primary caregivers in vulnerable contexts such as poverty, abuse, or coercion. I spoke to women in Mexico and they said, well, the government isn't providing jobs for us and we have to provide for our children, we have to pay school fees and hospital bills, but the drug dealers will give us jobs. So many of these women are being forced into jobs because they're not getting provision. Also, women who use drugs are often subject to criminalization in many countries as well. And actually, many women who use drugs have a background of vulnerability and gender-based violence. And many UN experts and world leaders are actually calling for drug consumption to be treated as a health rather than a criminal issue. So I'll briefly just highlight some of the recommendations from the report. One is really the importance of prioritizing data. And so I was very happy to hear some of the recommendations that we heard before around voluntary reporting. We need to better understand how laws and policies are affecting women disproportionately. There's a big need to decriminalize many of these laws which are on the book and which target women. Also, the importance of centering the leadership of community-led organizations and experts, including women with lived experience in any reform efforts. And I was very happy to see a resolution that TIJ tried to push forward earlier this year about how important it is to center women with lived experience. And then again, which really goes to the heart of the Bangkok rules, is avoiding imprisonment and really trying to invest in kind of social support systems and in alternatives to incarceration. So I just briefly wanted to kind of give a highlight of what some of these could look like. The Bangkok rules call for an investment in alternatives and community-based justice. And I definitely think this is something we haven't seen enough of over the past 15 years. Because this takes resources, but it also takes bold leadership. And it forces us to really reimagine what justice for women could look like. It's important to remember that many of our criminal justice systems were created by men for men. What does it mean to kind of think about what justice for women could be? Colombia is a good example here. A group of formerly incarcerated women called Mujeres Libres, which means free women, worked with different civil society groups and the government, and recently passed a law on alternatives. This means that women who are sentenced to 8 years of imprisonment or less, who have dependents, so those elderly relatives or children, they can actually access community service rather than being incarcerated. This law isn't perfect, but it is a big start to making sure that women can be in the community, being supported by their families rather than being in prison. In the UK, there are women's centres, and these are centres where women can be based in the community, be with their families, and receive support to address some of these issues that led them into contact with the justice system in the first place. So receiving economic empowerment, helping them to find jobs, getting mental health support, support for gender-based violence if they're in abusive situations. And often in these women's centres, there's peer support. So there's women who have had experience of these issues themselves, and they can support these women. Research shows that these centres are much more effective. Women are much less likely to go back to prison if they've been in a women's centre. But also, this is actually much more cost-effective. It costs about £4,000 to support a woman through a women's centre for a year. It costs about £52,000 to put a woman in prison for a year. So these sorts of initiatives are not only much more cost-effective for governments, but much more cost-effective for communities. Another example I want to highlight is in Kenya, which is actually a project that TIJ and Penal Reform International supported, which is gender-responsive probation. These organizations worked with the Kenya Probation and Aftercare Service to amend pre-sentence reports. These are produced by probation officers to inform magistrates of the background of a woman and to recommend sentencing options such as community sanctions, so they can better reflect a woman's reality and background. So this project really helped probation officers to understand the background of women who came into contact with the law, understand poverty and vulnerability and coercion, and how this might impact what happened. And actually, the research showed that the probation officers were much more likely to recommend a community service option, but also these community service options were much more tailored and gender responsive. So, for example, they took into account issues such as safety. If a woman has to walk for an hour to go to a community service and it can put her in danger, or she has to walk through a dangerous part of town, that is going to make her less likely to comply. Or how does the community service option allow her to take care of her children? Is the community service option the same time as when she has to pick up her children from school? So it's these very basic things when we talk about being gender responsive, but often they're not put in place. And this was a really positive example. And the last example I just want to give is the International Network of Formerly Incarcerated Women. And actually, a year ago, I was here in Thailand at TIJ, and TIJ hosted the Asia meeting. And it was really wonderful to be here with women from around the world in Asia who've had experience of imprisonment, as well as family members. And I think this is so important to just keep remembering that when we try to reimagine justice for women, when we look at options and solutions, we must always center the women themselves. They're the ones who've had experience of the prison system. They know best what are the solutions for them. Family members also play such a critical role as well. And I'm really grateful for the work that TIJ has been doing to make sure that people with lived experience are really central. Back in February, I had the pleasure of being in Bangkok and during the International Corrections Association's conference. And it was one of the first time, thanks to TIJ, that there was a panel of 3 women with lived experience, and I had the huge honor of moderating that. And many prison officers stood up. They had tears in their eyes just hearing what these women were going through. That sounds like a simple thing, but I think even just having that dialogue and getting people to understand and to talk to each other is a really, really important start. As the keynote speaker from CEDAW, I think she eloquently said, nothing, I think, will change unless this work is resourced, particularly the work of civil society. In everything I've mentioned, I think it's really civil society groups, whether it's women with lived experience or lawyers or kind of NGOs working in the policy space, who are really driving so much of this change. But actually, this work is desperately under-resourced. In 2021, Women Beyond Walls did a research report showing the lack of funding for work with and for incarcerated women and girls. We interviewed 34 organizations from 24 countries across 5 continents, and all of them were in perilous funding situations. 70% didn't get funding from human rights or women's rights donors. And I think, as our speaker mentioned, that this issue is often left out of the feminist movement. We are now at a time when women's rights funding and human rights funding is even more perilous, that there's been so many cuts now in funding. And my big concern is that these civil society groups like Mujeres Libres or others who've pushed so many of these changes, who've really, alongside TIJ, been the custodians and implementers of the Bangkok rules, will not be here. They will not be here by the time we reach the 20th anniversary of the Bangkok rules if urgent action isn't taken to resource that work. And resourcing that work doesn't mean giving them project funding. It means properly resourcing them, giving them core funding so that they can pay salaries and office and overheads, just as all of us would need in our own work. So I think this is a really opportune time as we think, how do we move on from the great work that's been achieved in the last 15 years, but how do we really make the Bangkok rules a reality? And I think this key part is really making sure that civil society is resourced. And so I look forward to working alongside all of you to make that happen. And I just want to thank, again, TIJ for being such an ally for us in this movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. And we've been told that your video can be played right now, so we all can watch together.
Lens of bias towards incarcerated people because I used to think incarcerated people were criminals, only to find out 90% of the people who were in there were victims, were poor. It was circumstances, it was the social economic status. It was hundreds of stories, and the common denominator, vulnerability, social economic status, poverty, those who have been marginalized. It was truly, truly heartbreaking. And that really opened my eyes and changed my lens of how I looked at incarcerated people. But it also truly made me have a resolve that we truly, truly need to do something to see to it that prisons are not used to punish the vulnerable.
Would you like to say something more regarding the video? Thank you. Thank you very much for your slide and your presentation regarding the intersection of poverty and women in criminalization. And also you mentioned how women in the Global South has been treated because of the law and make women into criminalization. And also you emphasize how Bangkok Rules is instrumental in helping women. So that's the highlighted of the points that Sabrina told us about the situation of women in poverty and criminalization. And especially you mentioned how funding is really crucial to raise awareness for different stakeholders in society and the whole world to push this cause forward. Thank you very much. So I'd like to turn to you right now, Ms. Taghreed Jaber. You'll be discussing the Bangkok Rules through a women, peace and security lens. And how do this conflict and peace and conflict and crisis, how do this issue relate to women who come into contact with the justice system?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair, for the opportunity. I would like also to thank the Thai Institute for Justice for the invitation. And today in the morning, when Professor Kaya Tark talked about his experience dealing with the Bangkok Rules, he took me back with him 15 years ago, when in 2009, I was among the intergovernmental group who contributed to the drafting of the rules. And I remember the vibes in the room. I remember the aspiration that we had, local civil society organizations and different NGOs trying to push as hard as we can to more gains for women who are living inside detention and the promotion of non-custodial measures. In reality, we didn't want women to go at all to prisons when we were in that discussion, but as you know, there are inevitable cases where, unfortunately, women have to end up in detention. I remember the princess sharing with her several panels across the globe, talking about the Bangkok Rules, making sure that we are translating and making in all possible languages all the available toolboxes, documents, to Arabic, to French, to Swahili, to the different languages, so practitioners and prison staff can have actual access to them. So thank you for taking me back to that journey. And I was actually assigned a very harsh task this time from TIJ, focusing on the whole issue of conflict and how conflict even make all the circumstances of female prisoners harsher in reality. And this takes me to talk about the whole agenda of women, peace, and security. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. Several people would know it through Resolution 1325, a very famous UN resolution that was maybe the first to recognize that conflict affects women and girls on different ways, and that women participation is essential in peace and security decision making. Several of you know it through the national action plans on women, peace, and security, the concept of security sector reforms, which we all work towards, and that includes an important component of police corrections and prison reform, peace processes, which is new for us as practitioners in the field of penitentiary reform, and we will see later how important it is to link peace processes and peace tracks and negotiations with prison issues. And the most important one is the humanitarian settings, which is a key component when it comes to conflict. Bangkok Rules, I don't see them only as a tool related to prison reform. They are a human rights agenda, they are a sustainable development agenda, and they are a peace stabilization agenda that is important to maintain. And in that, they cross very much with the women, peace, and security agenda, since they are both human rights driven, sustainable development, SDG 5 and SDG 16, and justice sector transformation as a key component of both of them, and women protection and recovery. The women, peace, and security agenda is built on 4 main pillars that is talking about prevention, protection, participation, relief, and recovery. I'm not going to be able to cover all of that in my presentation, but I would like to focus on practical examples on the whole issue of participation and relief and recovery. However, when it comes to prevention, the rules of Bangkok rules are very much related to the basic of prevention, breaking the cycle of violence, understanding the root causes for and pathways for criminality of women. I do remember PRI conducted a research about the characteristics of female prisoners in more than 8 countries. And in Jordan, where I come from, 38% of female prisoners were there, and they were influenced in their criminality by gender-based violence that they have faced in their lives. 70% was in Kyrgyzstan. And that can show you that prevention from violence, which is shared by the 2 agendas, is a key component for why women sometimes end up in detention. Non-custodial measures. I have worked across the years from Algeria to Morocco to Yemen on the whole issue of counter-radicalization in detention. And we have seen, all of us, and witnessed the rise of females participating with the Islamic State. And when they came back with ISIS, the known as ISIS, and then when they came back to their countries and societies, many of them faced detention. One of the key issues related to diverting women from the criminal justice is the fight of radicalization inside detention, and making sure that we are really fighting and countering terrorism in an effective way. Less crowded prisons, more focused programs for men and for women also on these type of issues. Keeping women in the community, as was discussed and stressed by the Prime Minister today, when he talked about the impact of having women as the house in their house and safety of children and the unity of the family, is key to counter violence, radicalization, and other things, because it contributes to the stability of the family. As we said, history of violence, structural vulnerability, and manipulation. I always say, every woman we divert from the system is the success for the society. And it's a success for peace and stability at different level. When it comes to protection, Bangkok Rules works on promoting the protection of women inside detention. And that includes protecting female inmates from any abuse and violence that they can face while they are inside detention. Another interrelated point with the targets of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. If you look at the national action plans of many of the countries, you will find an important indicator there that is related to reducing violence against women in public sphere. And detention facilities are part of the public spheres. How much is that reflected in the reports that countries actually draft and write to capture their commitment towards these indicators? Zero. Zero. You will not find any sub-indicator that is focusing on violence against women inside detention facilities. This is why it is important for us to make sure that national preventive or national action plans on Resolution 1325 look at female prisoners and do not leave them out as a target of the female population who needs to benefit from the protection under the strategy. Participation. You all know about the conflict in Yemen. You heard about it. It has been going now for more than 10 years. When the conflict in Yemen started, the country was divided almost de facto into two, the south and the north. Through our work, we found out, we came to the reality that there were only 12 female officers left working with the police in the south of Yemen, with 0 female officers inside detention. This reality needed from us an urgent intervention to work on supporting the presence of female officers within policing in general and within corrections. We cannot have female prisons run only by males and actually with no female supervision, one of the main Bangkok rules requirements in relation to that. We responded with a program with the Ministry of Interior where we have worked on the creation of the Female Police Academy, providing training for them, providing specific training, urgent and quick comprehensive training for some of the female officers who were actually trained to deploy them to prisons to cover the gap that exists there, to deploy them to border controls to cover the gap that is there in relation to the search and protection of women in general. Today, I'm so proud to say that after almost 8 years of work, we have 4,553 female officers working in the South who were hired, trained by us to work with the police, and around 800 of them working with the prison department at this stage. What does that mean? More protection for women. What does that mean when it comes to the Women, Peace and Security agenda? Is that we have managed also to support the hiring of 58 female officers at top decision-making places within the Ministry of Interior, which led to, which is part of the main issues related to participation under the Women, Peace and Security agenda, led to influence all the policies, work of the Ministry of Interior by making them more gender sensitive. The whole issue of capacity building and training for staff, which is covered under Rule 29 of the Bangkok Rules, talks also cross-cut with the main objectives of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Women need to reach decision-making places for us to see reform, for us to influence policies, for us to change laws and legislations, for us to make sure that the voices of the most vulnerable is heard. This definitely does not put aside the importance of people with lived experience and their participation in the process. And PRI has been very active working on this issue and trying to even make their voices reach the UN different mechanisms and programs. Talked about that. Relief and recovery, the fourth and last component of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. In the Bangkok Rules, we promote women empowerment, female inmates empowerment in terms of economic empowerment, education, rehabilitation, family connection, and actually making sure that their reintegration in the society is smooth. Economic empowerment is a key component of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is supported to make sure that we have resilient females who are capable of defending their rights and taking care of their communities. Humanitarian assistance. We have, all of you and many of you know the harsh and real reality of the situation inside detentions in general. I would just leave it to your imagination what wars can make to these realities when all the chains of services are interrupted, when the state focus is actually on providing the mere basic services for the people inside detention. Unfortunately, detentions are usually neglected during wars and conflicts, which leaves thousands of people unlooked for. This includes women and children. We have been working in Sudan since the conflict started, and I'll give you a small example, the cholera outbreak, where you have cholera inside prison, you have less than 24 hours to respond. If you don't respond, thousands of people will die. The cholera erupted at the female wings, where there were 10 little children accompanying their mothers in detention. Acute needs, problems. However, how much does the current humanitarian assistance efforts globally and programs are really looking at prison? Believe me, I work in fundraising in this sector, and I can tell you it's very difficult to convince donor community to put money and invest in supporting those who are inside prison during conflict and during crisis. So it's neglected and forgotten when it comes to humanitarian assistance efforts. The last point, peace negotiations. You look at the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and you will see that the main part of it is to make sure that more women are becoming peace negotiators and participating at the peace talks and negotiations. Legitimate request, noting that almost the average, that 7% only of peace negotiators are females. Only 7%, which is a very low percentage. But what is key for us is to look at how prisons are represented in peace talks and negotiations. One of the main issues that you will see discussed in transitional justice processes and peace negotiations is prisoners' exchange. You might come and ask me, how much does that include talking about exchange of female prisoners? There's no data, but I can tell you from me being part at the front of this and inviting, advising the UN on several prisoners' exchange around the world, almost less than 0%. They look at exchanging male prisoners when it comes to war, but women are ignored. The same applies for the whole peace negotiations and transitional justice. When you talk about the whole issue of justice reform, usually you will find judiciary and police and army on the agenda. But what about penitentiary and corrections? And I think you also heard about what happened in Syria and the prisons under the previous regime in Syria, and you saw the atrocities that happened there, where I can assure everyone here, and I hope that we will not stand here in 5 years to talk about it, or we will talk about it with positive outcome. Syria peace and transitional justice process will not go forward until the whole issue of torture, disappearance, and the legacy of prisons is solved, and the government put forward real commitments towards non-repetition and that this will not happen again. Because it's a serious atrocity that has affected almost every Syrian house. So how can we make sure that issues related to prison reform, gender, are on peace negotiations? This is the key component and a key issue that we should work at. As you can see, the relationship and the intersection between the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and Bangkok rules are many, and it's even worse when it affects marginalized groups, and it involves internally displaced persons as part of the conflict, refugees as part of the conflict, or those who are affected by it at a larger scale. Finally, after working in this sector for the past 25 years, I can say that peace without justice is fragile. And justice and the trust in government institutions and rule of law processes is key for peace and stability. Without that, we can achieve nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taghreed, for showing us how the Bangkok rules has been applied in the area of women, of peace and security, and especially how the rules has been applied in helping women in detention, which is very crucial, and how you explained to us the agenda of women and security is now very crucial. And thank you very much for your dedication of this work and how violence happening in the area of North Africa and Middle East. And it's very urgent issue to address how to have gender responsive justice system to help women, especially in the detention. So we have all listened to your overview of the past work and application of the Bangkok rules in your areas of work from UNODC, from women in poverty and women in war and conflict zone or area. Now I'd like the three of you to help us in guiding us in seeing the way forward for the Bangkok rules. It's been this year we marked 15 years of the Bangkok rules, but obviously we need to move it forward. How do you see the next direction of the Bangkok rules in the near future if we would like or aim at having it to be sustained in the next decade, 2 decades? What's the policy or action you think the whole society should be taking in order to move the mission of the Bangkok rules forward? May I start with you, Taghreed? Yes.
Thank you. Let me say that over the past 15 years, I'm one of the people who have witnessed progress, positive progress when it comes to the implementation of the Bangkok rules. I saw across the MENA region more and more countries revising their penitentiary laws in line with the Bangkok rules, drafting SOPs procedures related to that, providing more training for female officers actually on that, and increasing the number of female officers inside detentions, which is a key issue. The other positive trend that I have been also witnessing is the use of alternative to imprisonment and non-custodial measures. It's still shy when it comes to the implementation, but I do believe a country like Jordan that adopted the alternative sanctions from after Corona, after 2022. And you can see that now they have around 11,100 cases, which is a very positive step forward when it comes to that. Definitely not for women, but for male and female prisoners. There's a need for more disaggregated data. Lack of data is a key issue, and that means that we need to do more research in this area to be able to capture what are the real problems that are there. Evidence-based interventions, this is what we need. More training for prison staff on these issues. We have worked with Algeria and Morocco to introduce Yemen, to introduce specialized training programs on Bangkok rules within within prison academies to become part of the curricula that each prison officer has to study before they start working inside prisons, males or females when it comes to that. These kind of interventions that focus on capacity building, institutionalized learning processes is key. When it comes to the relevance of this event here, and we're talking about the accelerators and funding. And I'll join Sabrina, but when she said that one of the key things that we need to support and make sure that grassroots organizations, local organizations are receiving funding to work on this issue, that they are capable to do the work there. And we should look at that in line with the closing space for civil society organizations and the funding challenges that everyone is facing right now, from the UN to the smallest grassroots organization, and the priorities of the donors. And we were talking earlier about the political landscape in the whole world lately and how challenging it is becoming for us and for the human rights movement in general, which also applies to the whole issue of gender mainstream and supporting the most disadvantaged group. So and I hope to see that this acceleration fund working. I hope to see that it's providing practical, direct solution based on evidence-based to female prisoners wherever they are, and also contribute to support our efforts that is focusing on international advocacy and policy and influencing states to take the needed steps for reform. Thank you.
Thank you for your clear and insight idea of clear intervention in order to help bring the issue forward and to apply the Bangkok rules for having clear intervention for female detention officer and obviously on the funding. So Sabrina, what's your take on moving forward the agenda of the Bangkok rules?
Thank you so much. I think I'll focus on 2 points, which Taghreed also mentioned, but I think one is data. And we still don't know, how many women are in prison worldwide. But actually, if states are complying with the Bangkok rules, we should be seeing a decrease. So I would like to see more ways for states to actually have to kind of come and be held accountable for implementing the Bangkok rules, and to, at the very start or basic, just being able to say how many women are in prison, and we should be able to see a decrease. The Bangkok rules is very clear that prison should be a last resort, particularly for pregnant women or women with young children. But we actually don't know how many pregnant women are in prison in many countries. And so even, being able to kind of get that data, I think, is really important. I really like some of the suggestions that you made around voluntary reporting or a special rapporteur. It's always interesting for me that we have special rapporteurs on so many different issues, from mercenaries to many different things. But actually there's over 11 million people in prison, and we have no special rapporteur for this very key population. Obviously special rapporteurs aren't a quick bullet solution, but I think it's just very important to make sure that they're being able to raise these issues in a very visible way. And we have regional rapporteurs. The African Commission has a very effective rapporteur on prisons, but actually there's no one at the international level. So I think that was a really excellent suggestion. So data and accountability. And then I will also agree around funding, because so much work happens by frontline justice organizations. Actually, when you look at UN reports or you look at regional reports, they're relying on information from these groups. They're the groups that are going to be going in and, delivering pads for women in prison, food for babies, who are going to be providing legal services. And research shows that if you have a lawyer at an early stage, you're much more likely to get an alternative to incarceration. I've worked for many years with women on death row. We've been able to free women who are on death row because of violence, because of poverty, but that takes time. So if these organizations aren't resourced, none of this work will happen, and the Bangkok rules will not progress. But this resourcing, it needs a particular kind of resourcing. There's been lots of research in philanthropy about what is the best kind of resourcing for civil society. And there's unanimous agreement that this should be core flexible funding. Because too often we see civil society getting project grants, which means, okay, you can implement this activity, you can cover your expenses, but you can't cover your staff, or you can't cover your overheads, you can't plan for the future, you can't plan for transitions. And what this means is this leaves really weak civil society groups. we have to trust them. They know what is best for themselves. They know this context. And if we're not resourcing these groups in the right way, and that was something that our funding report really showed. For example, in the funding report, one of the key strategies that civil society couldn't fund was their work with women after incarceration. So we need to fund civil society, but we need to do it in the right way, because otherwise we're not going to make an impact. And I can't stress how critical I think that is, because this work hasn't been funded. And so now when we're looking at a situation where there's cuts in funding, it's this work that's going to be the first to disappear. And I think it's going to be very hard to implement the Bangkok rules when we don't have the kind of frontline justice workers who are there trying to implement this work. So I think that's what I'd really stress. Thank you.
More funding. That's clear enough, clear and strong message. Dr. Mahtani, so what's your message on to bringing the Bangkok rules forward and to make impact around the world?
The easiest way for me to answer to that is that simply agree with the other two panelists on this. There are basically three ways in which you can implement a standard and norm. One is through dissemination of information, which the Thailand Institute of Justice has done very ably, but more information has to actually reach the policymakers and the practitioners around the country. It's there, but it's not getting to where it should be. And this is a question simply of the policymakers and practitioners not being aware of it, or it's not in their language, or it is in terms that they do not understand. They simply do not understand that this is a problem. And there, the second way to implement is through technical assistance, which is exactly what the UNODC and the Program Network of Institutes is doing with a number of civil society organizations, non-government organizations around the country, with countries on request. Now that on request is a problem, because those countries that request, they already understand that this is a problem, and they have the willingness to at least look at what the UNODC, what PNIs, what NGOs can recommend, and say, well, maybe we can actually take this forward. The third one, and I very much agree with what you have said, and that is about the importance of accountability and basically trying to show member states what it is that is needed. And that is why I very much would like this idea of a special rapporteur taken forward and other mechanisms. There are resistance to this. Yes, I do agree that there is positive progress, but it's always spotty progress. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. At times you do get 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And when I look at policy making, which I have done very much in my own country and then throughout the European Union, there are 2 easy responses from the middle-level managers why they cannot do something. One is, it's not our priority. There's so much other important things that we have to deal with. This women prisoners or women who are in non-custodial punishment, well, they are serving time for bad things they have done. Society would not accept that we pay more attention to this. And the second question, or the second easy knee-jerk response of middle-level managers is, well, we don't have the money. What you're doing, or what you're suggesting, is certainly worthwhile, and we understand that. Our heart is out to you, but we don't have the money. Now, here, the evidence-based practice, evidence-based policy is one of the important solutions to get more member states to understand this is something that is in their own interest to deal with. It is a whole-of-society approach, that is improving the position of women. I don't want to get too much into that, but it is something that does have a knockdown effect on other areas. And here you do need that data. I hope you don't mind, Dr. Kittipong, Dr. Fisset, if I can advertise the United Nations Crime Congress that is coming in 4 months' time in Abu Dhabi, where the Thailand Institute of Justice has the privilege to organize a workshop on the use of data. That one looks largely at a certain specific area. It doesn't look specifically at, for example, the criminal justice system, but smaller areas. But there, one of the issues that will be dealt with is, where do you get this data? What are the sources? Do you look at national statistics? Do you look at governmental agency statistics? The data held by academics, or the data held by the private sector? How do you combine this data? And an important part of that is, and this, Dr. Nattha, is where people like you come in. How do you communicate this data to other people to get them to understand that this is a problem? And it's not only a problem that is unsurmountable, sorry, it is not a problem that is unsurmountable. Some jurisdictions, some countries have good, solid evidence on what can be done. And when you do this, when you improve the position of women prisoners, women in non-custodial punishment, it can be cost-effective in the long line. And when you say cost-effective, hey, wait a second, then the Ministry of Finance becomes interested. And if you can make this argument that there is solid evidence that certain improvements, certain policy changes, certainly changes in mere practice can make a difference, and that will save you money at the end of the game, then you can get more and more middle-level managers, policymakers to understand why this is important, and you can get the public to understand that this is something that they should support. It is not a question of helping people, women who have committed offenses, who are bad people. This came out very movingly in that podcast, but it is simply providing them with sustainable livelihoods, with the means to be contributing members to society. And that would be to the benefit of all of society.
Thank you very much, Mahtani, for your insight, and thank you very much for our distinguished panelists on your powerful insight comment. I really respect how you have integrated, you have compiled your knowledge and experience directly from the ground and bring it to highlight into the forum today, and especially the role of the media. I also very much aware that it's really important to disseminate all the information and the situation. So now I'd like to open up the floor for the question for Q&A. Probably we have time for a few questions. So if any of you would like to share or ask our panelists some questions, please feel free. So if there is no question for now, I just like to ask the last question. What do you see as the main, obviously you have recommendation for policy, for practitioner, for policy maker, for media, for civil society to move the agenda forward. What do you see as the main obstacle that this mission would be quite hard to accomplish? Or what's your major concern? We don't have much time, so.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Just let me say something. One, as Professor Mahtani just talked about what he gets as responses from practitioners working in this field. You know what is the most practical challenge is that those women are a minority within the system. You know, and the fact that they are a minority within the system, despite the fact that the numbers are increasing and all of that, makes double discrimination against them. Because you go to a country and they will tell you, I have 20,000 male prisoners and I have only 400. You want me to build a prison for 400 female prisoners? Are you kidding me? I have already overcrowding at the male sections. So I need to focus there, which is linked to the major challenge, which is the whole issue of women's rights in general and making sure to put women's rights and gender mainstream within the whole policies and structures of any government. Not all the governments are gender sensitive and responses in their laws, legislations, and policies, and this applies even to this issue too. So gender mainstream, change the mentality is key, gender budgeting, so many issues, and I think that the fight's still very long for us and for the next generation, hopefully, who's going to come after us to follow on that.
Thank you.
I think there's many challenges, but maybe one I want to highlight is I still think there is so much stigma and stereotyping around women in prison. And I raise this because, I've spoken to donors who are like, Sabrina, yeah, it's very compelling what you tell us, but look, we can't tell our board that we have provided money to a woman who killed her husband. Even though, yes, we acknowledge that she was being abused for years and she killed him in self-defense, but that's not something we can sell to our board. We can't sell to our board that we're supporting a woman who was in prison because she sold drugs. Yes, it was only a small amount. Yes, she was coerced. Yes, she did it to kind of provide for her children, but we can't sell this to our board. And I think the more we try to address some of these stereotypes, really understand these stories, and really see that actually, if we say we're going to leave no one behind, if we really say we're going to support all women, it means even women with complicated realities. There's no perfect victim here. And I think that is a big step, because if we don't deal with that, then we're not going to have more investment. Governments aren't going to make this more of a priority. And I absolutely think that when you imprison a woman, you are imprisoning a family. We need to make that connection about the huge harm that's happening to children. Not that will happen, but that is happening to children. And so this can then change our imperative for why this is important and take away some of the stigma around this. And I do want to thank TIJ and especially the government of Thailand. It has been so important to have a champion on the international stage because this issue is so overlooked, even in women's rights circles. So at the Commission on the Status of Women, with TIJ support and many other partners with PRI, we held the first ever high-level event this year. I mean, this is the 69th Commission on the Status of Women. It shouldn't have to take that long. And in the political declaration, there was nothing around incarcerated women and girls. So this just gives you an example of how neglected this issue is, even in global gender equality circles. This is a global gender equality issue. When we look at reproductive rights, economic empowerment, gender-based violence, poverty, all the issues that we work on around women, this is completely intersecting around women's incarceration. So I would like us to change that. And I think part of this is listening to the stories of women themselves, listening to their voices. And I'll just end by saying, my country, Zambia, in opposition, our president was imprisoned during opposition. And he was detained in Mukobeko, which is a maximum security prison. And where he was detained is where people on death row are held. And later he was released, and when he was elected president, one of the first things he did was abolish the death penalty. And why was that? Because he had actually been in prison. He'd actually had the chance to speak to people on death row, to understand why they were there, to understand the conditions they were in. I really hope we can take more policymakers into prisons. I hope we can take more. I'm not saying we should arrest them. Let me be clear. I'm just saying I think we need to kind of remove that barrier and make, yes, visit, but also share these stories, have these dialogues, because the more we can understand this, I think this will help us to kind of really change. We've had this justice system for so long, and it's not serving us. I think it's really time to reimagine what justice for women could look like, and I invite all of you to do that. I think that, for me, is a really exciting proposition. What could it look like in the next 5 years? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your powerful insight.
That was just so powerful. I don't know if I could add very much to it. We've already mentioned the funding priorities, the stigmas, the women as a double minority. There's very little to add to that. On the issue of stigma and the position of women, one of the things that policymakers keep returning to is they would say that the women deserve this because they have committed an offense. And what the public simply does not understand is the reality, and that is, who are these women who are in prison? It has been repeated today many times that the majority of women in prisons in most countries, if not in all countries, are or have committed nonviolent offenses, generally minor nonviolent offenses. So if, once again, you could make vivid who are these people who are in prison, And also, what are the alternatives? What are the benefits of non-custodial sanctions? And how that can also improve the quality of life of not just the offenders and their families, but also of the communities and of all societies. I'll leave it at that point.
Thank you very much from our distinguished panelists. Clearly, we can see how women in detention need gender-responsive justice system, which is now more than never. And we need to, like you said, it's gender mainstreaming, reducing the bias, stereotype, and having clear empathy for women who are in prison. So that may cause the change. And for you to try to highlight the issue so the public can understand the whole situation much clearer, and that can push forward the real issue of gender equality at the global level. And as the three speakers have already emphasized a lot. Thank you very much again for Dr. Mahtani, Sabrina, and Taghreed for joining us for this very important panel discussion. So please give a big round of applause to our panelists. So let me return the stage to the floor.
Thank you very much to our distinguished moderator and all panelists for this insightful and meaningful discussion. Your diverse perspective, ranging from international standards and norms, human rights, prevention and peace and security, including multifaceted victimizations, community collaboration. This also, certainly brought the Bangkok rules to life in today's reality. And we have deepened our collective understanding of what meaningful gender-responsive justice truly requires to sustainably enhancing the life of female inmates and offenders nowadays.